Hey, it's Drybear, and today I want to talk about trading in Path of Exile 2. If you're not in an SSF league and you want to know how to trade, I still get asked every single day, what overlays are good, where can I find them, and also what should I be looking for in trade, how do I trade, and what items are worth investing into or selling. So let's start with an overview of trading in Path of Exile 2, and it doesn't seem like this is going to be changing, at least in the near term. They have talked about potentially upgrading this. There's definitely been some discussions on whether or not this is the correct method, but it is a, player-to-player, bizarre-like marketplace that you'll have in Path of Exile 2. You can trade with other players, and it is, it transcends language and location. You can trade with someone in China, in India, in Korea, in North America, South America, Europe, it doesn't matter. Anyone that can log on to Path of Exile 2 can actually trade. So the first thing that you need to know in order to trade is that it will all be done through your stash. And this might obviously be, old news for some people, but I want to leave anyone behind when we dive into the actual meat and potatoes of trading, what to look for, that sort of thing. So in your stash, you have the option of having premium stash tabs. If you don't have any premium stash tabs, you will have to buy them from the microtransaction store, and these premium stash tabs can be turned into a storefront for items that you'd like to sell. So all you have to do is click on the tab, or however you do it on console, you'll go up here and you can set this tab to be public. Once the tab is public, you can then set prices on items in the tab, either by setting everything in the tab to a certain thing. So you see how this says buy out 2 exalt, 5 exalt, 8 exalt. That just means that anything that I put into this tab is automatically set to that price and listed online, and people can message me and buy it. But you could also do individual pricing if you wanted to. Like, you can actually just go through and put things, if it's not individually, or it's not globally priced, you can individually price it, and you can set whatever price you want on the item. And again, as long as it's in this tab, the tab is public and it has a price, it will show up online. So the website you'll need to use, and even if you're on console, you still have to go to the website. This is pathofexile.com/trade 2. I can leave a link for that down below in the description and the comments. And you bring this up, and this allows you to search for any items that are in someone's stash that are public and ready to go. And so we can just check one of these items and see that it is up here on this. So we can pick maybe like this crossbow that we're trying to sell. It's a little overpriced, but we'll work the price down as people try to get it. So you can see that this crossbow that we have listed in here for 29 exalt, we put it up on here and is now showing up on this. So now this can be globally seen by anyone in the world, and they can do something that they wanted to buy the item. So whether you're on console or on PC, all you have to do is hit this direct whisper button down here. It'll show you how long the item has been listed for, whether it has been, how long it's been up for and when it's been updated. If the player is currently online, AFK, or offline, so you can see whether they're actually there at their computer or at their console, and then you can hit the direct whisper button. So if you have your account logged in, so you have to log into pathofexile.com with your PoE account. Once you have that logged in and linked, this button becomes available, and you can click this and it'll message the person in game, which will allow you to interact with that person. You see, I just messaged myself and received a message from myself here. And all it does is it messages that person, it shows the item, it gives the list of the price, and it tells them what tab it's in so that they can more easily find it, which is really cool. So if you have that open, I don't think it'll work for me, you'll have the ability to be able to kind of grab that, and then what you usually do is people will just, invite this person to your party, so you can like click their name, invite them, they join your party, they usually come to your hideout or whatever part in town you're going for. The general culture is that the buyer goes to the seller. Sometimes you can't based on what you have unlocked in the game, so usually you just kind of do your best. But in general, super end game, usually the buyer will go to the seller to go get the item. You grab the currency that you need and you start a trade with them, and then you trade. Now, when it comes to trade currency right now, the primary items that get traded are Exalt Orbs as the primary currency, and then as a higher level currency, there is Divine Orbs as well. So those are the kind of like the two main ones. Divine Orbs are usually around 120 Exalt right now. They've been going up and down. Week 1, they were like 3 exalt per divine orb. Then they skyrocketed over the next couple weeks, and they went to 70, 80, 90, 100. And right now they're well over 100 exalt orbs per one divine orb. And usually you can get most of the decent / good items for exalt, and the best item in the games, you have to use divine orbs in order to purchase those. Now, there are still people that sell things for anything currency related in the game. Some people list Vol Orb, some people list Orb of Alchemy, and then for the really cheap items like like Regal or Orb of Augmentation, Transmutation for that sort of thing. It all depends on what you want to price it as and also what you're willing to pay for the things that you find online. Now, when you're going to buy an item, you want to make sure that you bring the correct currency, but you'll notice that these have a maximum stat count. So if you're going to trade with someone, you really want to make sure that you have the correct amount. And you also want to be very cautious about people trying to scam you in the trade process as well. When you open a trade window with someone, you will have to hover over the item to confirm that you've seen it so that you can trade. But sometimes people will do things where they will try to do this, where they'll say this is 40 Exalt, and because they kind of look similar, they hope you don't look closely enough to realize that this is Chaos, this is Exalt, or something like that. So they try to dupe you that way. Or they'll do what's called the cancel scam, which is you open up, you put the correct currency into it that is for the trade, then you accidentally cancel the trade, and usually people will just hit the button accidentally, especially on console with the controller. So you actually okay, oops, and then you just quickly re-add the similar currency, but then this time you put around you try to grab something that's kind of similar that might be similar to that, and you put this here, and then again, because it's kind of like bronzish, brassish looking, you assume it's the same trade, and you quick trade. So just be careful about what you're trading for and that sort of thing. And we actually just got a request from someone, so we can even show that process right now. So he's looking to buy this. We can invite him to a group. He joins, and then since we're the buyer, they usually come to you. And what's great about this system is it will show you where the item is. So this is in my 2x alt tab. We go to that, and you can see how there's this purple outline on the item that they're looking for. It will highlight that for you, so you can click this. It's now in the inventory, and then we just go ahead and trade with this guy. It'll open up trade. Once this goes through, then we can drop the item in there. He'll put 2x alt. We hover over it to reveal it, and then we hit accept, and he will take it. If he's reading the stats right now, a lot of people will do that just to make sure they're buying the right thing. So that is the whole process of trading. Now let's talk about something available, overlays. If you're on PC, console people, please don't pitchfork and torch me. Yes, I know that this is only for PC, so this is a PC option. There are 3 different overlays that are very popular right now that can help improve your gameplay experience, but also improve trading quite significantly. You can see one of them up here next to my head. This is one of the options that you have there. Those 3 overlays are PoE Overlay 2 from Overwolf, Sidekick, and Exiled Exchange 2. I can leave a link to all 3 of these down below, depending on which one you want to use. They all basically have the same functionality. So PoE Overlay 2 is the one that I've started using the most, just because I think that it is the fastest loading and has the best trade interface that I've used. But it doesn't mean that you don't have the same options with the other overlays. So PoE Overlay 2, Sidekick is also very good for this as well. It has the same functionality, just a different view on everything, and you have chat commands and keybind and stuff like that. You can also use Exiled Exchange 2, which has the same kinds of things and functionality as part of that, and I'll leave a link to all of these down below. All you have to do is download and install these and then run them alongside your Path of Exile 2 on PC to have this running. Now, there are some very basic things you can use with this overlay. One of my favorites is you can add hotkeys to them. So there's a hotkey for teleporting directly to your hideout with F5 on basically all 3 of these. So you can just go to a waypoint, hit F5, and it'll teleport you directly to your hideout without you having to click the button or type /hideout or whatever. There's also some other things you can do to make your whole life better in viewing items and testing items. But the primary thing that I think that the overlay solves in a good way is being able to automate the trading process, but also being able to price check items in game. So now let's talk about the price check function and the look on how that functionality works for these overlays, and then we'll get into how to price items, what to look for, and generally some advice on how you can go into different leagues using this knowledge to price items and determine value. So first, one of my favorite parts about PoE Overlay 2 or Sidekick or any of these is that it automates the trade process. So for example, with PoE Overlay 2, you'll notice up here and next to my head, there are these buttons that show up. So when a trade comes in, it says, hey, there's a trade request. You can either say, you can close out the trade. You can re-highlight the item if it didn't show up properly in your stash. You can invite the person. You can initiate a trade with the person. You can whisper them. You can tell them, hey, can you hold on a second? I'm in a map, or I'm doing a citadel right now. Give me a second. All of that is functional there. But what's great is that when you hit the finished button, you can have a preset message that will go to that person, and then it'll automatically leave party. So you can just, once they accept the trade, hit the done button, It'll send them the pre-recorded message. Mine is just like, thank you, good luck. The default one is, you probably see this a lot if you trade online. You say, hey, thanks so much, have fun and good luck, whatever. That's because they're using an overlay that automates that process. It will automatically leave the party and everything gets closed out for that, which is super cool. And also some of these will show like how long it's been since they asked you for the trade and all of that, which I think makes things a lot easier. It also allows you to price check items. So the idea for this is really just items will have value determined by the player, and those are kind of just loosely determined by how far into a league you are. Right now we're well over a month into the season 0 league for Path of Exile 2 early access, and generally the later into the league you go, the prices get more and more wonky because people have different needs at different points in the league and also what they're looking for, and they also have different currency and different player wealth that they can use to spend on items. So the variability of the pricing will go up and down over time. But if you're using an overlay, you can just open up the overlay menu. All of them have similar menus to this. This just happens to be the Overwolf version of this. You can bring it up and you can say, hey, find me items that are very similar to this with like these stats. Like pick on the stats that matter. This is a bad roll, so we don't care about that. So we can hit all of these. It'll be rare, minimum these stats, and it'll search. And it'll search all of the trade websites for items that match your query, and it'll tell you the price that they have, how long it's been up for, and who's selling it. So you have that kind of presentation. So that way, if you like get an item that drops, you can say, okay, well, how much is like really just how much is a item that like a chess piece that has minimum 1308 evasion rating, right? I mean, when you search for just that, you'll notice that a lot of these prices are really low, right? So just by default, getting to this value on a chess piece isn't super valuable, but maybe if it has 135 life on it and a little bit of resistance, maybe that changes the perspective a little bit as well. So you can see that these prices are higher. There's only one 1x alt. There's 2, 3, 5, like all of those going up, makes it much more valuable. So what if it has some main stats and a little bit more going on it? You can check those just to see where the price goes. And of course, if you add all of those, some of these you'd have to play around with and get used to what the pricing is and like what you're looking for to figure out what the price overall is. Generally, it's going to be a very guess and check process. That's why people usually will have put an item up. If it doesn't sell after a day or two, they lower the price on it and just keep lowering the price until eventually those items sell, and then you can, you know, keep going through that same process. But it is a very like trade to trade, bizarre like marketplace. It's very much up to the seller and the buyer to meet up and do their thing, and so those prices will vary wildly. Sometimes you'll get completely taken out back for the amount of price you have to pay for something, and sometimes you're going to steal because the person you're getting it from maybe priced it really low. Maybe they just wanted it out of their inventory, so they put a super low price on it so it sells fast. It's all over the place. Now let's get into determining value, figuring out price, and all of that. I think the price tool is very useful for learning that process and also just quickly scouring through to see like, you know, how much an item is useful versus not. Like you can just go ahead and grab these. You can see how much people value one stat or the other, or how good something is just based on that. And I think it's great for learning, but it's not going to be the end all be all for how you actually figure out what a value item actually is. And this is going to be twofold. There's going to be available stats on an item, right? So how high a stat rolls and how well a stat rolls. That's one part of it, but also understanding what builds are actually out there in the Path of Exile ecosystem, and what those builds need can be very confusing and different as well. So take this, for example, this Rattling Scepter, which generally doesn't have that much spirit on it. It has 125 spirit, so why am I listing it for this? It's still a little overpriced. It's probably going to end up selling for, you know, 15 to 20 exalt, but the main reason for this is that even though it didn't roll damage percent on it, is many of the very high level builds for like, you know, Summon Witch or Minion Witch need maximum mana and mana regeneration. And even though it doesn't, like, it has accuracy rating and attack speed and main stat, not crazy, and the spirit value is low, it does have more value because of the fact that those builds require mana. There's tons of these things, like being able to get accuracy rating on items, rolling more and more, and especially getting things like maximum level of lightning spell skills, plus damage and things like that. All of that really plays into whether or not a build actually needs it. Some builds require like crit chance and crit damage. Some builds require chance to shock, chance to ignite. So it's going to be a very big learning curve for you figuring out like what builds actually need. And that's where like experience comes in, and also being able to use the price check tool to look at that. But that doesn't mean that you can't, like, at the very least, understand the core foundation of the game and how stats are rolled, so that you can look at an item and say, okay, this one should have good enough value. Let's just see if it's meta enough for people to have interest in it. Whether it has value or not would be like the next step. So a great resource for this, if you're new to Path of Exile 2, is poe2db.tw. There's plenty of websites that show this that have reference, but this one is the most complete that I usually go to for that. And what's great about this is it allows you to go to an item type and see what the roles are on that item. So you can see if we click on quarterstaffs, for example, here, you can see all the list of prefixes and all the list of suffixes that show up on that item. So you can see what stats actually roll on the item. And it's important to understand this because it tells you what an item is for, but also if you're looking to buy something, it can help you understand where things go. So prefixes and suffixes, they are a like kind of an ancient, archaic way to explain the name of the items. You see how this is a beast core, or you can get items that have, like, you know, different names on them. The prefix suffix thing came from a very old system in like Diablo, where it would change the start of the name and the end of the name, that sort of thing. But just keep in mind that on most items, they can have at most 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. There are items that will have less, depending on the tier of the item, the rarity of the item, the type of the item. Some uniques will have more or less, some can break this rule, but in general, you can have a maximum of up to 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. And this is important because you wouldn't want to roll like, hey, give me a quarterstaff that has adds to physical damage, adds to fire damage, adds to cold damage, adds to lightning damage, adds increased physical damage, accuracy rating, and increased elemental damage with attacks. Because a yellow quarterstaff cannot roll that many prefixes, which means that item doesn't exist. You wouldn't be able to get that, right? And so you want to make sure that you're looking at, or like if you're looking to buy an item, you want to make sure you're pulling from the right set here. So a quarterstaff could have, you know, like increased level to all melee skills, leeches damage as life or mana, and then you could do like critical damage bonus, and then you could roll accuracy rating, increased damage, physical damage, and like lightning damage, for example. So that would be like a complete item that you can look for. And the range of those can be shown on the website. You can also in-game, you can hold Alt on an item and it'll show you the range of something that rolls, so you can see what there is. And on top of that, stats can double roll as well, which means that you can get 2 copies of the same stat on the item, and those stats automatically combine to create a bigger value. So for example, on my weapon here, you can see that this has 113% elemental damage with attacks. Except if we go to crossbows here on the calc, you'll notice that the max here is going to be 81. So how does this have 113% over the maximum value of the increased elemental damage with attacks? And it's because it is a double roll. It rolled 2 of the same stat, and those stats merged to create a bigger value, a bigger range for that, right? So depending on the item, you can get 2 60% rolls to get 120%, and that will take 2 of those slots, depending on what level the item is and also what you're looking for. So that's kind of like a big part of that, is understanding the difference between prefix and suffix and the range of these. So if you're learning how to price items, and you hold Alt on this, and you see that it's on the lower end of the range, then you can see that it's not super great. So for example, this chest rolled 100% out of the apostle, 100% for increased evasion rating. That makes a big difference in the value because it rolled the higher value of that and gave you more value there. You can also, you know, just logically understand that if there's a high value stats, like for example, increased physical damage, elemental damage with attacks, maximum life, things like that, if those double roll and both the rolls are high, that can make the item even more valuable because it gives you the option to be able to combine those to get a higher value on one of the most important stats on that item in general. And so that's when you start getting these crazy values popping up on items that really scale up like really high, getting, you know, super stacked because they either double roll or the tier of the item is really high when it dropped and things like that. You can get some really good value out of those that allow it to scale to the moon, which makes it more and more valuable compared to other items. Now, I think the simplest way to look at this is that it is double rolling. The Path of Exile purists, as people in chat will probably jump on this, is that this is not really double rolling, because realistically for these, you cannot have duplicates of the same mod roll on a weapon. However, there are very common rolls on items that have duplicate stats in them. So for example, you can see here on the crossbow, we have increased physical damage, and then we have a dual setup of physical damage and accuracy rating. Same thing for accuracy rating and increased light radius. And so when you double roll, it usually means you're using these, PoE 1 players will call it hybrid stats, but it's a combination. So for example, on items like this, you can see like there's like a specific one line for it. But if an item has multiple of the same stat because of hybrid rolls or whatever, it'll show multiples of that. If you hold Alt and when you let go, it will show the added value together. So you can see there's two different increased physical damage. When it puts it together, it's 124%. When you split it up, it shows 53 plus 71, that sort of thing. Now, this is kind of like a bit of like a nuance to it. Obviously, you can't just get multiple, but just know that you can get more than the maximum allowable range of something if you have the stats that have the same stat on it, working together and doubling up on that item specifically by using the mods that actually have the same stat on them. And getting that can usually make the item value go up, right? So normally a normal mace wouldn't be able to get to over 84% for this tier and level and available stats, but because it has the accuracy, physical damage, and physical damage on it, it can get to 124% for a one-hander, which is more than you'd usually expect from that just because of that extra roll. And what can change the value of an item is the the other things that happen to the item. So like number of sockets, like having sockets on item. You see this has runes in it right now. You can put soul cores as well. In the new update, you'll be able to replace these and resell items in the trade league as well, which makes a big difference. So you can have that set up there, so that can usually increase the value. And you can also quality up it as well. So you can see this has a quality on it, being able to use your quality items to make that item better with Blacksmith Whetstone, the Armorer's Scrap, Arcanist Etcher, even adding sockets with Artificer's Orb. All of that can add value to the weapon. Generally, for experienced traders, that doesn't matter because people just use the base stats, and whether or not they have to use the materials to like qual it up or add sockets and add, you know, the items into the sockets themselves. Usually they'll just look at the stats themselves, but some inexperienced traders will just look at the total value when they're searching and say, I want something that has this much DPS or has this much value on it, and it will usually include the modded values on it as well. So keep in mind that quality as well as the sockets can also change it. And the last thing you want to pay attention to is corrupted. This is something that throws a lot of new players off in this game. Corruption is a final step in the process. So you use these things called Vol Orbs to corrupt an item, which will do a random thing to that item, and then it will lock the item. So you want to do it as the last step in the process. This includes, you know, putting things into the, like adding sockets to it, increasing the quality of it, re-rolling the stats on it, modifying it in however way you want. You want to do all of those first, get a very good item, and then if you don't need the item right now and you want to try to make it better, you can corrupt it. And corruption is a little more fair, in my opinion, than in Path of Exile 2 than it is in Path of Exile 1. There are a bunch of things that can happen. You can add an additional socket, so you can see how this crossbow has 3 sockets instead of 2. It can increase value on things, like you can actually change a lot about it, or it can do absolutely nothing. So it can actually either do, like one of the outcomes for the Vol Orb is it does nothing and locks the item, which means that one, you won't be able to change that item in the future, and also if you have a amulet, it means you can't anoint it right now because there's no tainted oil in the game, so anointing it or doing the instillment in this is not really possible right now if it's already corrupted, so things like that can change things up, and it just kind of blocks the item. However, it can also ruin the item too, so there's a big risk in doing it. It can re-roll all the stats on your item, and all those stats could get way worse. It can brick the item in random ways, and so you get the best items in the game by corrupting, but you also run the risk that you ruin the item or do nothing to it in the first place. So that can also change the value of an item. Sometimes the craziest items in the game will be corrupted because they got that extra little boost of value, an extra socket, an extra stat, another implicit, something up on top of it, something that changes the value of the item to make it stronger. So corrupted items will usually have more than the allotted available options because they are corrupted and the corruption went well. Now, I know this video is already getting pretty long, but I do want to go through the last 2 steps of this, which is crafting items, and then also finally what stats generally to look for each slot, and what classes generally need from a large point of view, so you can just see these and understand that those are valuable when you find them. So first, crafting in Path of Exile 2 is something that I would say is a lot less viable than it was in Path of Exile 1. And what I mean by that is, say we take like a blue item here that rolled decently. you can craft items. So like if you have a currency tab, you can put this in here, and there's a whole bunch of options you can use to like go ahead and put things onto the item to make it better, right? So this is a blue item with 1 affix on it. So we can take a orb of transmutation if the item is white, a normal item, and turn it into a blue item, and it'll give it a random modifier. So say this was white, we can make it blue with 1. But blue can have up to 2, so we can take orb of augmentation and add another modifier to it. So it just gained increased mana regeneration rate and cold damage to attacks as its 2 modifiers, but we can't add more than 2, so this is going to fail, right? So it can only have 2 for the rarity. So you can take things like regal orbs to turn a blue item into a yellow item, or a magic item into a rare item, which will add another stat to it, right? So now it has 3 stats on it, and it's yellow. But yellow items can have anywhere from 4 to 6 modifiers on them, outside of special circumstances or corruption or things like that. So you notice that this thing here has this amount of like stats on it, but it's not its maximum amount of stats. So I can just waste Exile Orbs here. We can take Exile Orbs, which is, it adds a new modifier up to maximum on a yellow item. So I can roll this, right? So I can take this and I can go boop, and it gives it another stat, lightning resistance, and we can go boop, and it adds another stat to it. So now we have a ring that has cold damage, lightning damage, accuracy rating, lightning resistance, and increased mana regeneration with an implicit of cold resistance. Not crazy, it does have some damage, but it's missing a whole bunch of the other stats that would make rings very, very good. And generally in my experience, compared to Path of Exile 1, most of the time, unless crafting goes very well, you end up getting back the value of the crafting items you use to make the item in the price, right? So if I sold this, this might go for an Exile, maybe, probably not, which means that I just used an augmentation orb, a regal orb, and 2 exalted orbs to make something that's worth about an exalt or less, right? So I end up losing value on that. It can go very well. Like, so for this item was a very low level chiming staff that only had +5 level to all lightning spell skills on it. And I just kept upgrading it, and I happened to get mana, increased lightning damage, increased critical spell damage bonus, and increased spell damage on it. So all those are very good rolls, and generally for like the wands or the staves, if you can get all of them to line up with the same element, that's really good. So like increase the fire skills, fire damage, chance to ignite, and like extra damage as fire. All of that put together makes a very good staff because it's able to scale up that way, but it doesn't always go well. So in general, if you're not really sure on how to make a really good item, you're better off just selling it for a very cheap price at a low value, or selling it to a vendor and just waiting for items that drop. But as you get better at the game and you get really comfortable with spending currency just to get, like, because you know you're going to get more of it, you can actually go through the process of crafting once you understand how crafting works and what items can be good versus not. Now, crafting goes even beyond this, because there's things like omens where you can get from rituals where you can actually like control what your next crafting attempt does. There's also essences that you can use to like change specific modifiers or things like that, and I'll like be able to direct the process and do different things with it. But generally that's how crafting goes. Now let's talk about what stats to look for from a broad sense. Every build is different. Every goal is different. What you're doing on hardcore is going to be different from standard and SSF versus, you know, trade league. All of that is going to be very particular to what your goals are in mind. But in general, there are some universal truths that you can use to inform your decisions going into determining the value of an item. Now, speaking in broad terms, everyone is going to need both defense, survivability, and damage output, right? You obviously need to survive the things that are attacking you, and you need to be able to kill the things that you're going against, including doing enough damage to deal to the boss. Every build is different on how it does damage, so you kind of have to understand the general direction for each build. So we'll walk through each of the general builds and what they look for in general for damage, and then there's also a different strategy on how you survive. There's hybrid setups where you'll use energy shield and evasion, or hopefully in the future we have builds that use both armor and evasion, but right now we have pretty much either full armor, which struggles in some cases. We have full evasion, which works until it doesn't, which I think is probably a much better state than it is for armor, and the fact that you just have to get your evasion as high as possible and hope to get lucky. Sometimes you roll poorly and you get one shot, sometimes, you know, rest of the time you don't. And then there's energy shield and combinations between the two. So if you're looking for a build that has those, understanding what people look for is going to be valuable. So for example, if you are someone who's looking for a evasion build, an item that has increased evasion evasion on it, a flat increase to evasion, and rolled a high value or has an item with high value on evasion, and has runes on it that has increased armor, evasion, and energy shield, can go a long way. Like, then you can start using that as a basis for comparing items together. So what would that even look like? If we bring up our trade window here, we can bring up the trade. Let's clear these out and let's look at what that might be. So let's say like body armor, and let's say we are looking for a rare, and I want a item that has armor of 1500. Let's say we want a really big chest piece that has a lot of armor. So you type in 1500 and you see that the armor for 1500, the first price for it is actually really low. It's regal. So if we're talking about all levels across the game, well-roll items, 1500 isn't really all that much for a chess piece. So what about 2000? What if we did 2000? Would that change the price on it? It brings it up a little bit more. So now we have 2200 on that. What if I did 3000 armor? 3000 armor brings it up to 5 divine. So now you can see that based on the availability of stats, this one has the corruption value on it and it has extra stats on it. It has increased armor at a very high roll. It has increased flat armor at a very high roll. It also has like the 2 runes for increased armor and it has the quality up. So this one brings you up to 3100 armor, which gives you a very high price for that. And that kind of brings that up there. So you can use the primary defensive mode. We can do the same thing for evasion. We can do the same thing for energy shield, right? So we can set values on this and set a minimum value on it. So we can say like 1500 energy shield on an energy shield armor does not exist. So let's do like 1200 energy shield. So you can see if we do 1000 energy shield, that's super pricey. The highest ones that are fully crafted will have that there. And again, remember, you could find an item that is lower than this value that doesn't currently have sockets on it and doesn't have quality. So keep that in mind, like learning that process is super important. But again, you can use energy shield, evasion, or armor as a like determination for how good an item is. If you find an item that has a high value on something, you can then look at that and say, wow, okay, this could actually sell for a lot because it rolled so much of one of the globally useful stats. So that's one of the universal stats, is the defensive. The next one is going to be maximum life, a very easy one. Based on the amount of maximum life you roll an item, it can change the value of the item dramatically. So we can do the same process here. So if we go to like our trade window, we want a body armor that has maximum life as a stat, and we can say minimum, let's say 200. Does 200 exist on any chess piece? It does, pretty cheap. So if we wanted extra rolls on maximum life, we can. Does 300 maximum life exist? Let's find out. Nope, it sure doesn't. 250, let's see. So now you can see that we're getting a little bit higher up in that price value. And again, keep in mind that you'll get hybrid rolls / double rolls to get some of these values higher, depending on the stat you're looking for. So 250, 260, like some of these can have like max roll value on them. So you can see like the maximum life here goes up to 260, but the other stats aren't all that great. And the value here, like we just saw the energy shield that was up over 1000. This one has a total of 386, not quite the same, but has the roll on it. So that's when you start looking at those values and you start adding stats to this to decide what it is that you're looking for on the item. And one item, a modifier being a good roll doesn't necessarily mean the item is worth more. The more mods that roll well altogether on the same item, that makes a big difference. Now, there are some builds that will use, like, for example, mana for survivability. So like Mind Over Matter allows you to use your mana pool as part of your health. So it takes from mana first before life, which means your mana is like an added life pool on top. And so you might run extra mana as a defensive option. So getting mana on a build might be super useful there. There's other things like Chaos Inoculation, which makes you immune to chaos damage, like Poison, which goes through Energy Shield, and then you focus entirely on Energy Shield to protect yourself from that. So there's a whole bunch of other things there, but again, maximum life, maximum mana, and then the pure defensive stat on item will contribute a large portion to the value of the item outside of the build-specific modifiers you'll find in the item itself. So you can use those as kind of like a North Star, compass to decide whether an item is valuable or not, because you could get a really good roll on a stat, for example, that's very good on the item, but then the core value of the item is so low. Like you get 35% chance to find rare items on an item that has 11 evasion rating or 12 armor. So yeah, it has a good roll stat, but the base is so low that you're paying a high price for equipping that item just because of that one stat. Next up is weapons. So like armor is a big part of that, looking for value there, maximum life, maximum mana, and then the defensive stat that's going along with that build. And then weapons have their own perspective as well. So for spell, like staff and wand and scepter, generally you're looking for percent increase increase to spell damage, and then that aligns with the element that that build is going for. So whether it is chaos damage for some chaos builds, or physical spell damage for bone or for bleeds, or if you're looking for lightning damage plus extra damage as lightning, plus lightning spell skills, or fire or cold, or whatever those are, that's generally what you're looking for. And usually the things that change on the item are related to that, and that increases or reduces the value on it. So spell abilities and weapons are very straightforward for that. Same thing goes for focus as well. See if I have any focuses in here. So you have the offhand of focus. You can put scepter in main hand or offhand, and generally focuses on increasing spirit. Scepters are kind of like the primary usage for like druids, witches, and templars and things like that, but they can be used for other characters as well, depending on the build that you're actually going for. So for those, you're just looking for damage increases. We talked about earlier how you could have increased spirit or increased mana regeneration or mana on some builds that require it, but just looking for the overall damage increase, and some of the rarer rolls like increase to skill level make a large contribution to the value of a magic item. However, you have to be kind of careful with martial items because there is a very core system for how martial items function. So for example, you'll notice that a lot of martial items have physical damage as their base. Then they can add elemental damage on top of that. They can increase elemental damage done with attacks. But the big thing that you want to know about this, especially for most martial or like, physical damage abilities in the game, is that they will convert a percentage of physical damage done to an element. This can range dramatically from very low percentage to a very high percentage. So like some of the special triggers can convert 100% of physical damage to lightning damage. So you'll find that even with like lightning evoker, ice evoker, ice shot ranger, a lightning mercenary, fire warrior, in many cases, even though they are doing a primary elemental build on a pure martial class, they will still want to stack a large amount of physical damage. So don't get tripped up by this. So you'll find that a lot of the best elemental damage weapons for builds that are martial builds that do elemental damage will have a base weapon that gives them a large amount of physical damage, because that is your core damage before things get scaled. It will convert all of that physical damage, or in some cases a percentage of it, depending on what build you're going for, into the element, and then the element can be scaled by other effects that make that element stronger. Increased fire damage, extra damage as fire, like increased to elemental damage, or damage to targets afflicted by an elemental ailment does element damage on top of it, that sort of thing. But just don't be fooled by the fact that just because you're running a fire warrior or a lightning monk, it doesn't mean that those builds don't also need physical damage. So again, a very easy thing to look for on martial weapons is what is the overall physical damage for it. And the meta we're in right now, most of the most popular elemental, martial or like attack style character builds still use a weapon with a large amount of physical damage on it because they're going to convert it. And let's just rapid fire some things now because the video has gone on way too long at this point, but you can find things like increased rarity of items found on jewelry. This is a very valuable stat right now because it allows you to increase the currency items that drop, the items that drop in all forms. Right now, it's one of the more powerful stats. Usually people will run this until they're ready to push like the Arbiter or some super end game boss where they need more offense. And if you can find items that have large rarity of items found on them, it can be a very big boon. You can get it on things like boots. You can get it on things like rings or amulet. You can get it on helm as well. Things like that make a big difference. And you can also find items that, do I have one? I do. There's like items that have implicit rarity on them. So like a gold ring and potentially like a gold amulet. These will increase the rarity of items found by default. And then you can increase them further by rolling that stat again. So you can see that this ring here has 15 plus 21% increased rarity of items found. So this by itself gives a large amount to it as well. So that's going to be another easy item or easy stat you can look for, that if it rolls highly or you have an item that has an implicit plus another stat roll on it, effectively a double roll, you'll be able to get a good value for that as long as the overall value of the item is quite good. So there's a pure dump on trading, how to trade, overlays, crafting, what stats to look for, basically everything. Super long video, but hopefully it was valuable, at least for a lot of people that are getting into trading or wondering this. I get asked this like all the time, so it's nice to have a reference that I can point to that people can use to learn trading in Path of Exile too. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more.
more people. And don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.